Well, Romans chapter 1, let's begin reading then in verse 18 and read through to the end of the chapter, verses 18 through 32. Romans 1, 18 through 32. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind, to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. All right. Quite a statement, quite a condemnation, quite a text. We are at that portion of Romans where Paul is, here at the outset, laying out the need for the gospel. Why is the gospel so necessary? Why is it so urgent? Why is it that Paul can say, right before these verses that we just read, in verses 16 and 17, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. He's not ashamed, but he's rather eager to preach this gospel because it is the power of God for salvation. And such power is needed in the world for salvation for men because of this wrath of God. And if we, as unpleasant as it may be to kind of study some of this about the wrath of God and what is going on here in that sense in a negative way, it's necessary. We won't understand the solution if we don't understand the problem. And I hope that these next few weeks that I teach, as we consider this text, this Romans 1 passage in more detail, that we will see just what the problem is, that we might be ever grateful for the solution that we have in Christ. So that's where we are, that's where we're headed. The title of the message today is Life Deserving of Wrath, Turning Off the Lights. Turning off the lights. Life deserving of wrath, turning off the lights. And we see that in Romans 1, verses 21 through 23. As I said, this is Paul's beginning part of why the wrath of God is coming. And he says in verses 21 through 23 what can be described as humanity turning off the lights. We have, in verse 21, for although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. So they have this knowledge, but they've turned away from it, and they've become dark instead. So a willful decision to turn away from truth and light and knowledge resulted in darkness. They turned off the lights as best they can. Does that make sense? And so this is, as we're saying, a life deserving of the wrath of God. Now, what I want to do at the outset is we're going to kind of have two main parts of the message today. The first part, I will explain a little bit about this chart I've handed out and the connections that it's going to help us to make, I hope, and make all this a little easier for you to follow. And then the second part, we will consider in more detail what exactly Paul is saying in verses 21, 22, and 23. So that's kind of the two parts of the message today. So, I want you to notice on this chart, and essentially what I've done, Romans 1, 18 through 32, we have basically three parts. First of all, this opening statement and setup, verses 18 through 20, right? Then the next section is really all about Paul explaining the ungodliness and the unrighteousness of men and the wrath of God revealed from heaven. And I divided that up into three categories: man's condition, man's action, and then we have God's action. Everything that we find that Paul says in this whole section can be found in one of those three categories. It's either describing the condition of mankind, or it's describing for us something man has done, or it's describing for us an action that God has taken in response to all of this. So it's one of those three things. So everything that we look at in here, he's not telling us about anything else, but about these three things: man's condition, man's action, and God's action. And so we have those three categories. And what we have there is I've just gone through the text, and every word I put in its proper category. And so as we just read through, we kind of know what's going on and what's happening. The other thing you might notice is that we have several stages here in this section. I have stage 1 and stage 2. And it's important that you read them that way, and we'll discuss that as the weeks go on. But in stage 1, we have the wickedness of man. And all of that goes together. They knew God but did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him. And then the fallout from that and the action, the way that looked in their lives. All that's there. And then we have in stage 2 the wrath of God, the situation that happens as a result of this. And there are kind of two parts to this. It's important, I think, that we don't see them as sequential, but as they happen at the same time, right? They're simultaneous. Stage 2 is this wrath of God. He looks at two things. Part A is judgment unto impure passions leading to dishonor. That's a mouthful. A judgment unto impure passions leading to dishonor. Look at verse 24. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. Right? So God gives them up in the lusts of their hearts to a certain result, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. It's said the same way in verse 26. For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Right? Desires and lusts of their hearts, which would result in dishonoring of their bodies in impurity. Now, these are, if I were to ask you today to describe the sins for which God will judge the world one day, we would mention some of these things. We would mention, men committing shameless acts with men. We would mention what he's talking about here, like homosexuality. It would be one of many things that we would mention to say sin is coming upon the world because of this. But in this text, it is not just a sin for which people will be judged, it is itself a result of the judgment of God. People don't act this way unless God has handed them over to a condition such that they're willing to act this way, which is an amazing statement. Now, it's easy for us to maybe think of that as other people over there, but this is just part 1. Part 1 is, in terms of human sexuality, the perversion of that, and in what men think of as satisfying their innate desires, the thing they so desperately want to do, they find themselves doing things that actually are shameful and dishonoring to their bodies. And they receive, as they act these things out, they are receiving in themselves the penalty for their error. And we don't just mean things like STDs or things like that. We mean literally just the act itself is so shameful, so degrading. In and of itself, man was made for such higher things than that. They receive in themselves the due penalty for their error. That's part one, or you might say part A. Part B, the other aspect of this judgment of God and turning men over, it says is judgment to debased minds leading to rampant sinfulness. It says in verse 28 on the second half, if you look at the chart under God's action, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. So God takes these sinners who will refuse to honor Him and acknowledge Him and give thanks to Him and instead worship all number of things, and He hands them over to their dishonorable passions for the dishonoring of their body, and then He also hands them over to a debased mind, a mind that's not right, that doesn't reason correctly, so that they would do things that ought not be done. Which is incredible. Again, to look out over the world, the list of things He lists here are amazing. All manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice, envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness, gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. All of those things are together described as filling up the picture of what Paul means when he says God handed them over to a debased mind to do what ought not be done. These actions which ought not be done are the result of the thinking of men. So a man comes and he begins to, something happens to him, he begins to reason about a situation. He says, you know what I should do? I'm going to do this. And it's one of these things that he should never have done. You see? He's wrong in his thinking. And so in his passions, the lusts of his heart, the desires of his heart, and the thinking and the reasoning of his mind, man is dark and foolish and unable. He's futile, as it says in the beginning. He's futile in their thinking, foolish in their hearts, darkened in their hearts. And this is what happens. And so, how could it be any other way that foolish people living in the dark with dark and crooked hearts left to their own devices, how is that going to go? It's going to be awful. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And this is exactly what happens. And you might say, well, who can intervene in this situation? Who could change it? You might say, well, I blame God for allowing this thing to happen to me or that thing to happen to me. Look, people turn from God and God has judged them. And the misery of the world is a result of this judgment. You want out of it, God's offered a gospel to be delivered from this. But this is the way it is. Now, so that's stage. We saw stage 1, we saw stage 2, and this judgment from God. And then Paul closes in verse 32 with this third section, a closing indictment of mankind's present condition. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. That might be surprising to think he's just talked about people having a debased mind. The result of that is they do things that ought not be done. How is it that at the same time they have a debased mind leading them to do things that shouldn't be done, they're also aware that those things shouldn't be done and they should do otherwise? Doesn't the world come to us in that sort of a situation? The problem with the world is they just need to be educated. These people that are doing these wicked things, they just need to be taught that that's not the proper thing to do, and then they won't do them. Well, that's not the case. You see, way back at the beginning, the first section I said is this opening statement and setup. And it really is important that you read it as a setup. He's setting up, he's telling us certain things that we need to listen and take with us into the rest of his argument here. And the things that he says, which are so important to know, is that verse 19, what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. The whole way through this chart, all the actions that mankind is taking, they are aware of who God is and what He's like and what He approves and what He disapproves. That doesn't stop them in the least from what they're doing. You see, God said, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. It's there. They are suppressing it. And what we are seeing is people willingly suppressing that truth and God judging them for that and saying, you want to suppress the truth? Look what it's like here living without that. Look what it's like when I don't hold you back from these things. Verse 20, for His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. It's not that they were clearly perceived by Adam and Eve and we've been living in darkness until then. Ever since, from then till now, these things have been clearly perceived. This is Paul telling us, God's telling us through Paul. People know God. People know God. Everyone knows God. No one is without this knowledge. You know, it's amazing to think the darkest, most twisted, animist religion in the world. You know, you read some of these ancient cultures and the way that the things that they did. You can say, well, they were ignorant, they didn't know God. No, they knew God. They knew God. In fact, it was in some ways, it was because of what they knew about God that they were doing what they were doing. This knowledge they have about God just keeps creeping up. This guilt that they have is causing them, they're unwilling to turn to the true God. But this guilt is causing, they've got to do something about it, and so they're not going to turn to that God. They'll do this and do anything they can do. Something good happens in their life, and they know that it was a gift. They didn't deserve it. It didn't turn out for them the way it should have turned out. And they're just so glad for it, but they're not willing to thank the true God because of the accountability they have to Him, so they invent something else to thank. It's incredible. This is the way it goes. Well, I say this, right under this closing indictment of man's present condition, this last section. I say, in the end, both the downward cycle and the awful condition at the bottom can be expressed in terms that truly define every sinner. That though they know that those who do such things deserve to die, but they do them and give approval then at times to even people who do. That describes every sinner. Now, I won't read some of the explanatory notes I have, but just the key down at the bottom, notice this. I have 4 different ways of highlighting certain text. There's an asterisk in front of explanatory notes. I have 3 of those explanatory notes, one under each of the 2 headings, the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, and the wrath of God revealed from heaven. You'll see there's some explanatory things there just to help you thinking in the right way. And then at the very end, I have an explanatory kind of summation. Then we have also text in red. The text in red, I said, is decisive action on each side. You notice, and there might be some other things we could have put in red, but I've in verse 22 we have man was exchanging the glory of God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Verse 24, therefore God gave them up to these other things. Verse 25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. For a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. This exchanging that's happening. The next verse on that same column, their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Right? And man likewise gave up these other things. So you have these exchanges that are happening. On God's side, you have Him giving things up. Not like an addict might give up something, or you have a bad habit. I need to give this up. I need to stop doing this or stop doing that. You have various things you might need to give up in life. That's not how God gave up. He didn't give up man in that sense. Rather, this giving up is the kind of thing you might do, let's say you're playing tug of war, and you're fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and if you let go, it's over. You're not going to struggle with them in this way anymore. And so, you're contending, and then you decide no more, and you don't contend anymore. Right? Let's let it go. But suppose I'm holding you, I've got one side of the rope, you think we're playing tug of war. Really, there's a cliff behind you, and I'm trying to get you to stop going down the cliff. And I'm holding back and holding back and holding back. And you just keep fighting me. And eventually I finally say, after all the warnings, I say, okay, and I let you go. And my letting you go is, in a sense, a judgment. It's both a letting you go, I'm not going to fight and struggle with you anymore, but I know what awaits you on that side, and I'm letting you go, and I'm delivering you over to it. The word sometimes is used when prisoners are delivered over to a jailer. They're handed over. They're not just given up. You don't just quit. It's a giving over. It's a judgment. Give you over in this sense. And they have been given over to the lust, in the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. It's a certainty what's going to happen. It's not a question mark in God's mind what's going to happen when He gives them up to these things. Now, in stage 1, Paul says that this all begins when man refused to honor God or give thanks to Him in spite of the knowledge of God that he had. And remember, we are supposed to understand about this, that this action is a willful response to what he knows and an effort to suppress that truth. Now, as I was thinking of an illustration here, unfortunately, I thought of one who most of the kids probably don't know. And I'm like, oh, come on, there's got to be somebody else I could think of. But Tiger Woods, okay, one of the best golfers ever in the world. He's kind of heralded that way. You can find videos of Tiger Woods, I think, if I remember right, like 3 or 4 years old on national television. This prodigal golfing kid whose father's like working with him and teaching him all these things, and he's so good, and like his life is golf, right? That guy grows up and as a teenager is winning major U.S. championships in golf. Like, it's unbelievable. It's never been done. This guy's incredible. At a young age, he was very, very good. In interviews and reports about him, you always saw his dad coaching him and training him to be a great golfer. Everyone was amazed at how diligently this young man worked at golf and how much his father worked with him to make him a great golfer. Now imagine if after his second or third major championship, someone asked him if he's grateful. Are you grateful to your dad for all those long hours of training and all the work that went in and the time you guys spent together at golfing? Imagine if he said something like, instead of saying, yes, I couldn't have done it without him, he said, I don't think that man had much to do with anything. What are you talking about? I'm not sure I even had a father. I don't really think of him at all. Yesterday, actually, I bought a Lucky Rabbit's Foot, and I just want to say, if you want to succeed at golf, get yourself one of these. You rub it like this way, and you put it in your pocket, tap it twice. I found when I do that, I hit the ball really well. I don't know what you're talking about as far as some dad that I had or anything. That just had nothing to do with it. This is what it's like when man doesn't honor God. Right? It's like you have everything you have from Him. It's like, what do you mean we're going to turn from Him for something else? Now, if that happened, I'm not saying, and it didn't happen, but everyone would know that it wasn't true, that he was lying, and he was lying willfully. It's like, we have all the evidence. We have the videos of it. We have the time before where 6 years ago where you're crediting your father with all these things. And you can't turn now and lie to us and say you don't even know if he's real. What do you mean a rabbit's foot? Why wasn't that your secret back then? You're making stuff up. And he might even say, no, really, I'm telling you, I got to have that rabbit's foot. And he might even feel that way. But it's all a lie. And he's told it to himself enough times now that he believes it. This is the sort of thing, the willful suppression of the truth that man is doing with God. To decide not to honor God or to give thanks to God. It's unbelievable. As man refused to honor and give thanks to God, he became a fool. He had the light of truth, but is attempting to turn that light off and to hide it. And the resulting darkness, in that darkness, man is left to false explanations and false ideas. It says they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Man is left to trading down from acknowledging the glory of God to pretending there is power and judgment in images and statues of lower things. Man, bird, animals, creeping things. It's incredible. Let's turn to a few other texts I'd like us to turn to just to see some of this. We're going to be kind of right in the middle of the Bible. We have Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. We're going to look at these texts. Let's look at them. How about we look at them in the opposite order? So Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 29. Ecclesiastes 7:29. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. All right? That sounds like what we're talking about. How about Proverbs chapter 1? Verses 29 through 31. This is what man has done, and now they're set up for the judgment of God. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 29 through 31. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have the fill of their own devices. You see that? This is exactly what Paul's talking about here. We read here, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. This is what it looks like. And then one more text in Psalm chapter 81. Psalm 81. Verses 11 and 12. Psalm 81, verses 11 and 12. But my people did not listen to my voice. Israel would not submit to me. And here it is. So I gave them over. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsels. Which is exactly what Paul said in Romans 1. God gave them over to the lusts of their hearts and to a debased mind. You see, the problem is, they didn't, at the beginning it says, they knew God. This is in Romans. They knew God. They didn't honor Him as, or give thanks to Him. And that resulted in a futile minds and foolish, darkened hearts. God then, in judgment, turned them over to those minds and to those hearts and said, see what you get. And this is what happens. And this is the way we should understand all of this here in Romans chapter 1. Again, Paul has two ways in mind that God has responded at the present time. There are others that he mentions later. God responds in wrath with death and a future judgment. But the two that he's addressing now have to do with handing them over to a debased mind and to dishonorable passions. It would be like Tiger Woods' father saying, okay, son, I'll make sure you have none of my help anymore. Now you'll receive only what help a rabbit's foot can give. Right? And then when he begins to, a few tournaments later, as he's developed a little hitch in his swing, there's no one to tell him anything about it. The rabbit's foot can't speak, can't do anything. Or he puts the rabbit foot in his pocket and he misses and he falls out of his pocket and he's all worried and he's freaking out now. And instead of being calm and relaxed when he goes to hit, he's stressed and he's sweating because the rabbit foot, the lucky thing, didn't happen the way it's supposed to. Right? It's ridiculous. And as crazy as that sounds, almost every athlete I know has their routine that somehow becomes more than just my routine. It becomes the thing I like, oh, this isn't going to go good because, that shoelace didn't get tied in that way. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, we're so easily given to this stuff. It's unbelievable. This is the way it is. All right. The first response, again, God mentions, He hands them over to dishonoring passions. That is, He hands them over to sexual perversions. He does this so that mankind receives in themselves, that is, in their bodies, the penalty for their sin. The abandoning of the natural function of man and woman is the first example Paul mentions. It happens because God sends people down that path as a judgment. It is always an abandoning of the natural for the unnatural. That's what homosexuality is. Now, people say, well, Christians are just kind of against homosexuals. It's like, well, we're against the homosexual lifestyle. But it's not as if that's just part A here of a two-part judgment of God. It's unique in the same way that Paul mentions elsewhere that the sin of adultery and fornication, those things are unique among sins because they are a sin against your body. Right? There are some sins that are unique in that way. They're not just a sin that you commit against someone else, or sin of the mind, but a sin against your body. You can do things to degrade and defile your body. And Paul's saying that one of the things that happens, that idolatry always leads to a perversion of sexuality. A refusal to acknowledge God and the natural function God put in order always results in the perversion of sexual desire. Some people will say, well, unnatural sexual desire. Some homosexuals were born that way. That's not what the Bible says. There's a natural function. It says literally the natural function is the actual word. And there's things that are contrary to nature. And there's no one's disputing that people that get to a situation where the lust of their heart, the desire of their heart, they're what feels like the inclination from within them is for something that the Bible says is unnatural. What we're saying is that is exactly a sign of the judgment of God. I hope that makes sense. Having the very fact that you have those desires. For instance, we have a dog, and he likes meat. He loves it. But if I were to put meat in front of that dog and he were to just the smell of it were to be revolting and start vomiting in another room and say something is wrong with that dog. He doesn't have the desires he should have. What is wrong with him? There's something unnatural and unfitting about he has desires that are contrary to the nature of a dog. And this is what we mean. People can have desires. They can have those desires, but they're contrary to nature. The fact that a dog would feel that way and behave that way towards that thing indicates something's gone wrong in the dog. And this is the way it is with the affections of man. His desires are wrong. It's defiling even that a man made for so much would even have those desires. Then if he acts on them, it's even worse. And this is what we mean. And we'll see that in this portion in front of us now. So let's look then at verses 21 through 23. Actually, before we do that, I want to review very briefly what we considered last time, and I really mean briefly, like just a couple minutes. Last time I spoke, we considered verses 18 through 20, and this idea that man is suppressing the truth continually so they don't have to deal with it. Does anyone remember some of the illustrations I used? I'm hoping the kids will remember the illustrations for suppressing the truth. Anyone? Go ahead. The beach ball underwater? Okay, and there was another one too. We'll talk about that one. That's the one I want to talk about. But remember what the other one was? Another game some of you maybe not have played? Whack-a-mole. Right. So in both of those instances, you have something like you have a beach ball. Let's just deal with that one. It's above the water. It wants to float, and you want to put it down. You don't want to have to deal with it. So what do you have to do? You have to grab it, get on top of it, and press it down. And the bigger the ball, the more inflated it is, the harder it is. Right? Whatever this thing is, you got to hold it down. And if you just decide for a moment you're going to stop trying to hold it down, it's going to pop right up. It's a constant effort you have to do. You have to be constantly engaged to suppress this thing and keep it down. And this is what we're saying. The truth of God is this way. See, you have that beach ball, and you're constantly perceiving that it's there. You're putting it down here so you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to think about it with all this stuff. You can kind of swim where you want. You can do all these things that you want to do. You don't have to let your brother or sister grab it and throw it at you. They can't do that. You don't have to deal with that because you've got it down here. You're suppressing it down there. The truth of God is that way. You're always aware of it. You don't have to deal with it maybe in these other things of life, but you're constantly having to make an effort to hold it down and thinking about holding it down in order to successfully keep it down. This is the way it is. So this is what the activity of man is now, and we got to think about that as we head into verses 21 through 23. Man, we already know what man is doing. Verse 21, although they knew God, so they have that knowledge, what are they doing? Paul's told us already, they're going to suppress it. What we're about to watch is man suppressing this truth, holding it down and refusing to acknowledge it. Although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. You see that? They did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. And what happened then as a result of that? Well, that was their action. The result, their condition is they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Wrong thinking. Foolish hearts in darkness. This is what happens. In John chapter 3, you can turn there if you like. I'm just going to read this. We have the famous text, right? John 3:16. Everyone seems to know that. If you've been around Christians at all, you've heard this verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Keep reading. For God did not, the reason that works that way is because God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment. So whether you've heard of Christ or not, the fact that you aren't believing in him means there's no salvation from you, which means you're already judged. What's the judgment all about? The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. See, this is the issue. They don't come to the light. They don't want to live in the light because they're choosing to live a life that light would expose as wrong. They don't want that judgment, so they suppress the truth, hide the light. Let's make it dark. Do all we can to make it dark in here and live our life. They became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. It says, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Now, one of my favorite texts on this is in Acts 17, and we have read this in weeks in the past, but let's just consider it once again. Acts 17, verse 16. As Paul goes to Athens and he comes there to this Areopagus, where we'll hear about some things here. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him. Athens was, of course, one of the great cities of the ancient world. He is there at Athens. His spirit is provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. This great, magnificent city full of all manner of false idols. What a thing. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, the ancient philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome, people who studied these people, they come by. Schools of people that all they do day after day is just reason these things and argue these things. The great scholars and debaters of Athens come to Paul. And what do they say? They converse with him. And some said, what does this babbler wish to say? Others said, he seems to be a preacher of foreign gods, foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took hold of him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, which is a special place there in Athens, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Verse 21, now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. You can bet that all these people thought themselves to be wise. They had set themselves up as the judges of every new tale and philosophy and idea. Come, bring it here. We'll tell you whether it's good or bad. That's what we do. We have this school of thought and that school of thought. We all come and we meet. And when we meet, we hear new things and we decide, give a verdict. What shall we say? That's these people. And then Paul says, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you're very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. That indicates a lot there, as we've already said in weeks past. I won't get into that. But what therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his own offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. And he goes on. Just think of this. He's just saying, look, you guys should know better. If you know anything at all, you know better than what you're doing. You can't have not just all these idols, you can't have any idols. And in all your idol making, oh, this God and this God, for all that you've made, you've still not found enough. There's still something about this God that exists that's not known to you, that's not acknowledged by you in all of your idols. And I'm telling you, that's where it all lies. The thing you don't want to look at. You know it's there, but you won't look. It's not in all these things you've invented. What a thing. Well, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Is there ever, I just think, when I hear that, I think of modern science, or modern scientists, I should say. Cannot all agree on how life began. They're convinced, though, it must have been what they called abiogenesis. But the beginning of life from non-life. It must have been. Why must it have been? Well, because there couldn't have been a creator. We don't agree with that. I'm not sure how that works. None of them are sure how that works. There's massive disagreement about it. They all have their theories, and one man gives his theory, and all the rest of them say, that's ridiculous. I say, well, what's your idea? And he gets up and gives his idea, and they all say, that's absurd. And they're right. It's absurd. But this is what it is. Watched a video in preparation for this that said there are 123 different definitions that scientists have put forward in recent years for the definition even of life. They don't even know what they're trying to define. It's ridiculous. And of course we're in a situation where people can't say what is a man or a woman either. We don't even know. This is what it is, the futility of their thinking. We get to the place where we don't know anything. 7 leading ideas right now about how the world might have how life may have begun. They say maybe lightning. Maybe lightning. Maybe that could help the process along. The guy has a theory about that, runs experiments in the early 50s and says, yeah, see, maybe this could have happened. And then the more they realize oh wait, that would never even begin to work. Never mind. Maybe, this is one of the leading theories that's still held by some, maybe clay. Stuff sticks to clay. So maybe like the things that are necessary to create a living cell, like got stuck in the clay, just in the right situation, and then it was all next to each other, and they just suddenly realized it could start, I don't know how it realized anything, but it could just start functioning because it was just there in the right spot. That's literally one of the top theories about how life would have begun. It's absurd. Clay? What are we talking about? Never mind. Maybe deep under the ocean, hot, we need lots of energy to kind of get things moving around because they're not going to move on their own. If we can get them kind of together and going in the right way, then maybe something folds together and creates a protein part or something. Maybe that would happen. So the idea is maybe deep under the ocean, hot gases released into the ocean, and the right material and energy was present to get things moving along a little faster. And then realize, oh, wait, never mind. That doesn't ever actually happen, and the minerals that we thought might be there actually aren't there, and all the things that it's not going to work. Never mind. Right? Oh, the opposite. Maybe it was super cold for millions of years, and that allowed for life to begin because they've discovered some of the elements needed for life to begin, they think, are so scarce and rare under normal temperatures that the only way to get enough of them together for anything to ever come together is to be super cold. Well, a minute ago, it'd be super hot. Now it's going to be super cold. It's crazy. And then they realize, oh, wait, never mind. Even under those conditions, this thing that we thought might be able to happen never actually happens. And we can't even get it to happen in a lab when we try to make it happen. They say, well, DNA is impossibly complex. maybe its simpler little brother RNA developed first. Maybe it was like a world full of RNA just all over, and then eventually the right combination came together and just by accident became DNA. Don't ask us how any of the RNA developed, but maybe that happened first. No explanations, just it's a little bit less complex than DNA. That's like literally as far as they've gotten on that one. It's incredible. And then they have the idea, well, maybe it was, instead of DNA directing the cell to do what it does, because that's how the DNA works, it directs the living cell to do all these things that it has to do, with instructions which are unzipped, copied, read, and then followed by other instruments which were also built from the code. We don't know how, none of these things have a brain, mind you, or can even perceive anything, we're told. But somehow this is what happens inside your cell like trillions of times every day in your body. Now, maybe all the things that only happen, we only observe happening when the instructions are read, maybe they were happening before there were any instructions, continually, in all kinds of cells that were just kind of just happening, and then eventually it just kind of happened that there was the DNA, and then it became easier for them to do these things because they had instructions. The problem is the cell's constantly doing things wrong. Things within the cell are recognizing that things are built wrong, tearing them down and into their constituent parts and recycling those things to build the right things because the cell messes up so many times. It's like it has its own quality control, which is very busy in the cell. And it only works if it has a pattern to judge it off of. It's amazing. You got something in your cells that are reading code, seeing what's done, and saying pass or fail. And then giving instructions about where to take it in the cell, right? That's like, it's bewildering. Anyway, so obviously this didn't happen. Well, despite these theories, this is how this video I watched, and I watched like 6 of them that all said these same things, so like from different science places. And they all end with this, and this is the quote I've settled on, but they're all something like it, but this is one of them. Despite these theories, the exact mechanisms and conditions which led to life's emergence remain unclear. As if these were good theories. Like, despite all these theories that we have, we're not sure exactly what it was. As if, like, you're hearing these things and thinking, I bet it might be that. Like, no one's thinking that. But this is all they've got. It's incredible. So again, we'd say, never mind. So, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Or religion, right? Various gods. How did life begin? Various gods are parts of the universe. The God who is the sun, or the moon, or the earth, or the sky, or the sea, or fire, or desire. Right? I mean, even things like human desire is Greek myth is a god, right? It represents this. It's crazy. You have these gods in various religions either eating one another or fighting. They're wicked. They're chopping each other up and creating the world from that. This is the arm, this is the leg, this is the body, it's like insane stuff. We have birds who created all things in some of these religions. We have all kinds of distorted stories, historical stories from the Bible, which are distorted by these other religions. What we find is the next thing Paul said. They exchanged the glory of God, the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. This is the language of idolatry. It's the same language that was used in Genesis when God created man, birds, animals, creeping things. Same categories from Genesis 1. So these created things. Well, let's look at a couple texts again. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 4. You don't have to turn there. It would be good to turn to this one for sure. Jeremiah chapter 2, just a little ways after where we were already in the middle of the Bible. Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 4. It says, hear the words of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and the clans of the house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, verse 5, what wrong did your fathers find in me that they went far from me and went after worthlessness and became worthless? Went after worthlessness and became worthless. This is what we find when men have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Let's look at a few verses later in that same chapter. Verse 11. This is the big deal. God is complaining to the people of Israel that they who have the true God have exchanged Him for false gods. And he's saying, even among the nations that have false gods, they don't trade gods. What are you guys doing? You have the real thing. And you've turned away. This is what it says, verse 11. Has the nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked, be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. So he's saying, serving me is like drinking from a living fountain. You've turned away, you've forsaken that. That is evil. And what you've done, the second evil you've done, is you've dug out cisterns for yourself, broken cisterns that don't even hold water. This is the evil they've done. Now, Paul says they have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for these other things, images resembling man, birds, animals, and creeping things. This is what they've chosen to worship. If you'll come down with me a few verses and maybe look at your chart, look at verse 25 under stage 2, where we are again describing the thing that they had done in stage 1. It says, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. Amen. Now look, this is amazing. Think about mankind, made in the very image of God to rule the world. What we find is, as he turns away from God, he's bowing down to statues of bugs and birds. He's sacrificing his children to cows. Do we understand what we're saying here? This is the futility of their thinking, the foolish hearts being darkened. Claiming to be wise, they've become fools. They've exchanged the glory of God. They've changed their glory for that which does not profit. It's no wonder Jeremiah says, be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked. It's incredible. Mankind is now, who was given dominion over all these things, is now worshiping, it says in verse 25, worshipped and served the creature. Can you imagine? Worshipped and served the creature? It's bad enough to serve him, to worship him too? Yes. In terms of man, remember in the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar's great statue, bow or die. From the New Testament, we know Caesar is Lord. Worship him as such, obey him as such. And there was Caesar worship going on in most of the cities in Rome. Pharaoh, again, borrowing from the Bible here in terms of people we encounter there, Pharaoh himself worshipped as a god. Yes, men. You know, we live in a society that it's incredible to think that is always outraged at the history of slavery. Oh, that one person would think they could own another. Okay, yes, that's wrong. Fair enough, agreed. We got people saying some people should worship another man as a god. Not just someone who owns them, as their god. It's unbelievable. Or birds, you think, oh, come on, birds? Yes. Yes, birds. The raven among Alaskan tribes, the ibis in Egypt as the god of wisdom, the vulture in Egypt as the goddess of protection of Pharaoh, the hawk as the Egyptian god of war. Among others, among other cultures, it's a divine messenger of their god, whose favor they seek, a hawk. Animals. Animals, yes. There's places in India, there's temples devoted to rats. To rats? Yes, to rats. To cows. Now, kids, think about this. Now, I hope you start laughing about this. Right? In India, they're sacred. Tigers. In Korea, they drive evil spirits away. Right? The tiger has that power somehow. Monkeys. In Hinduism, it's a form of their god of destruction. That's what a monkey is. Don't harm it or it will harm you. Shiva will get you. It's incredible. Wolves, deer, rabbits, elephants, horses, dogs, sheep, goats. This isn't made up. There are cultures where these things are worshipped. Think of it this way. Now, when I say it this way, I hope you'll realize Okay, yeah, this is a degradation of man. Anything we keep in a zoo, someone has bowed down to it and called it God, or a helping spirit, or believed that it was an oracle, some creature that would speak for God to them, a divine creature that could do that for them. The things we keep in a zoo, it's unbelievable. Creeping things, right? Whatever the creepy crawlies are on the ground, not just insects, but we mostly think of insects when we think of things that creep on the ground. I mean, all the beetles of Egyptian religion. You remember, Jonas, we went, when we were in Chicago, we went and saw that Egyptian exhibit, and all the beetles that were there, the scared beetles. Do we know what those beetles are? Anyone? Dung beetles. Dung beetles. Beetles that live and thrive and love manure. The dung beetle. You know why it's that way? I couldn't believe it. Because it takes poop and puts it in a little ball and rolls it. And they said, that's like the god Ra rolling the sun. This beetle is like an image, a very image of God. And they worship it. What are you talking about? It's a poop beetle. That's the sign? That's their whole thing? Put pictures of the beetle up? Pushing the poop around? Yeah. Worship it. Now you're telling me this is what man was made for? This is the glory of man? To bow down to the dung beetle? What are we talking about? This is amazing. Yes, the dung beetle. The mantis, among many in Africa. Some of you know those praying mantises. They're so cool looking. Like, if you're going to serve an insect, like, that's probably a good one, I guess. I don't know. But I mean, of all the insects, that's the neat one. But what are we doing? What are we talking about? A mantis? Honeybees, right? Many pagan peoples worship as a god. Spider, scorpions. Well, that's a good creepy crawl. That's a scary one, right? Mosquitoes even. Mosquitoes? I've never been tempted to worship a mosquito. Although you can imagine the plague of those things, what a mess this would be. You might say, whatever I got to do to get a mosquito to leave me alone, whatever they need, I'll present an offering to the mosquitoes and I won't die of some sickness. Right? So whatever it may be, it's amazing how these things happen. Men in darkness, the things they do. Well, it gets worse, beloved. It would be bad enough if they were worshiping men and birds and animals and creeping things. But it gets so much worse. That's not what he says. What does he say in verse 22? Somebody read it. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for, say aloud, images, next word, resembling these things. It wasn't just these things. It was worse than that. Images of these things. Let's go with me to Isaiah chapter 44. Isaiah 44. It's incredible. We'll read verses 9 through 20, and we're nearing the end here. Isaiah 44, verses 9 through 20. All who fashion idols, that's what we're talking about. All who fashion idols are nothing, and the things they delight in do not profit. Their witnesses neither see nor know, that they may be put to shame. Who fashions a god, or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? Who does that, right? Behold, all his companions shall be put to shame, and the craftsmen are only human. Even the one who makes the thing is a human. Let them all assemble. Let them stand forth. They shall be terrified. They shall be put to shame together. The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry, and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man, with the beauty of a man, to dwell in a house. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar, and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. Also, he makes a god and worships it. Like, what do you mean? He's got a tree, he plants the tree, lets it water it. 20 years later, he cuts it down, burns it for fuel. Says, you know what I'm going to do with the other half? Worship it as God. It's like, what? Wait a minute. He makes a god. He's going to make his god now. Okay, and worship it. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over half he eats meat. He roasts it and is satisfied. Also he warms himself and says, Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire. And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, Deliver me, you are my God. It's unbelievable. They know not, nor do they discern. Why don't they discern? For he has shut their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot understand. No one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment to say, Half of it I burn in the fire. I also baked bread on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten. And shall I make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood? He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray, and he cannot deliver himself or say, Is there not a lie in my right hand? It all begins at the very outset. They know God and did not honor him as God. What happens? They became futile. And this passage says that even though we read in stage 2 about God responding to their idolatry, we read from this passage their idolatry is itself the result of God letting them shut those lights off so that they don't see. It's incredible. What a thing. Beloved, think of Adam and Eve and all that they had in the garden. And this is what their children are doing? Can it be? What a thing. A couple more passages I'd like to turn to as we close. Beloved, we need to understand that the darkness of the world is not due to having no light. It is because people put on blinders. Foolishness is a result of turning away from the truth and embracing a lie. Idolatry is at the heart of the world's problems, not lack of education. Ungodliness is the root of our problems. Unrighteousness, the things we do, is the fruit of that. Can you see, I hope, how when you think of it this way, the problem with the world is a refusal to give God his place. And from that flows all of these things, which are themselves only even possible because God is allowing us to receive and to eat the fruit of our wickedness. That's the only reason it ever even gets this bad. But the only solution to those things is going back to honoring God, returning to him. We got to attack these things at the root. It's no good to say, well, this branch is really bad, we're going to cut it off. Well, what good is this? Another thing to grow back. It's not going to change anything. The solutions the world offers to its problems are all missing the point. The world looks out and says, oh, who's going to save these people? Well, I have an idea. You know what we need is we need $1 billion. If we had $1 billion, we could save these people. No, you couldn't. You couldn't. It's not going to do it. If we had a training program, we could do this. If we had if they were under a different economy, maybe this would work out. If they had a different government, we could save them. No, things might be less bad for a while with one change or another. But until we come back to the heart of things, nothing ultimately is fixed. We have to fix the root. That's the only thing to fix the problem. Only the gospel is the answer. It is the power of God unto salvation. Two texts I wanted to look at are both found in Matthew. They're very illustrative of this point. Matthew chapter 7. Verse 17. I'm not sure what the ESV has in this verse. I think they changed from what I had, so I'm going to read to what I think they changed these words to. But most of the other translations do anyway. The ESV that I have printed was, so every healthy tree, and I think they changed it to every good tree, which is actually the proper connection should be good and bad here, not healthy and diseased. But okay, so every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you'll recognize them by their fruits. Right? So you have a tree. If the tree is good, it's a good tree, it'll bear good fruit. If there's something wrong with the tree, it's a bad tree, it'll bear bad fruit. Right? I've got a garden at home, and they say that I've got a lot of tomato plants in there, and they say that there are a lot of tomatoes are susceptible to diseases. And there's all kinds of things you can do for certain diseases, and others they say, well, this disease lives in the ground. The spores are in the ground, and when the tomato plant comes in contact with them through the root, or even most of the times through the leaves, it contracts that disease and dies eventually. And the fruit it produces, it'll be producing fruit for a while, but the fruit isn't any good. So I've got my garden, I've got all this, and 2 years ago, I noticed a tree that had, or a tomato plant that had this disease. I thought, well, it could be this one, or this one, I don't know. And they say, well, it's probably in the soil. I thought, well, that can't be. All the soil is all the same stuff. I don't know how that could happen. The next year, planted a tomato plant there again. Same problem. This year, did it again. All my tomato plants are doing phenomenal, except for the one that's in that one spot. And this year I made sure I put it in the exact same spot as the last one, just to be sure, yep. So now what do I know? I've got a problem with the soil that's making that tomato plant bad. It's bad. It's a bad plant. And all the fruit on it all has the same problems. And it's no good. It's only good for one thing. You know what I do? To throw it out. I throw it out, I catch groundhogs with it. I take that fruit off of that, bust it up, put it in a live trap, catch groundhogs with it. And the thing's only going to do that for a little while longer because it's dying. Maybe another 3 weeks and the whole plant's going to be dead. Because the plant's bad. So all the fruit is bad. This is what it is. You can either you either have a good plant and good fruit, or a bad plant and bad fruit. And then one other one here, Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. Verse 33. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You hear that? Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. Look, I just got to tell you, I can't make that tomato plant good. It's dying. It's going to die. I've looked online all over. There's nothing to be done for it. It's done for. It's bad. And its fruit is bad. And Jesus here says, make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. Well, who can do that? Who can make the bad tree good? Who can make the good tree bad? Right? Well, people have made good trees bad. They've done that. That's what we've been reading about. But who can do the opposite? This is what Paul is talking about, why he's talking about the gospel. This gospel is that thing which can make that bad tree good. You look at your life and say, I've done this stuff. Look, gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents. I mean, is that you? It's a bad tree. It's a bad tree. You're under the wrath of God. There's judgment awaiting. You need to be saved from your situation. That salvation is found in the gospel. It's not just that the gospel is the only hope for the world out writ large, like countries and nations and things. Peace on earth. That's never going to happen apart from the gospel. It's also that the gospel is the answer for you in your particular situation, your particular sins, your particular circumstances. The gospel is God's power of salvation for you. The death and resurrection of Christ. Sins covered and atoned for. And a new heart, a new spirit within. Well, beloved, again, certainly a very negative message all the way through, but we've got to understand these things. And again, in the weeks ahead, we will look at next time I speak about this next section, Stage 1, Part A, and then next time we'll look at Stage 2, Part A, and then Stage 2, Part B, and closing things out. So we've got a couple more weeks here where we will dive in and try to understand more fully what Paul's been saying. I hope we've understood the argument as a whole, and I hope we understand what we mean here when we talk about the futility of their thinking the foolish hearts being darkened for mankind, and how that is, the evidence of it, where we see it in the world, man's religion, man's philosophy, man's science, all of these things. Like, whatever light that they have, it's ultimately, it's in essence, it's darkness, because it's not related to God. It's not connected to Him. Man's under wrath, and he needs salvation. And this is why Paul is preaching the gospel. Well, amen. Are there any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns anyone has they'd like to share?